What is the sweet truth? And should sweetness in wines be desirable or not desirable? And how are the key sweet wines made throughout the world? My name is Malcolm Lamont. I'm a certified wine educator, as well as a holder of the diploma from Wine and Spirit Education Trust, and hold a graduate degree in education. Happy to walk you through this webinar. And I'm happy to walk you through this webinar. We'll talk about 3 ideas: dispelling some myths around sweetness in wine, why sweetness should or shouldn't be desirable in a wine, and highlight some of the sweet wine marvelous styles made in Portugal, as well as Australia and throughout the world. Did you know that a serving of ice wine has less sugar than an apple does? And that in the 18th century royal courts, sweet wines were the height of fashion. And by my estimate, 3 of the world's top 5 most age-worthy wines for long cellaring and improving over time, 3 of them are sweet wines. I would include Port, Madeira, as well as Mosel Riesling, and the other 2 being Claret, a fine red Bordeaux, as well as Barolo from Piemonte. So what are some myths regarding sweet wines? They abound in conversation at wine shops as well as restaurants. And just in order to inform some of these myths and see if we can break some of them up. So first matter is that sweetness here in the Ontario market at the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, the sweetness rating is for diabetics, people with diabetes. And so the measurement is a scientific measurement in grams per liter of residual sugar. So we're not usually drinking a full liter of wine. A bottle is 750 milliliters. And so one standard serving is closer to 150 or perhaps 100 milliliters. So residual sugar, it should be about 1/10 of a grams per liter in a serving of wine. So if you have a wine with 70 grams per liter of residual sugar, one standard size glass of that wine has about 7 grams of natural grape glucose fructose residual sugar. So it really is not well represented in grams per liter. Conversely, a wine with 9 grams per liter of residual sugar has 1/10 of that in a standard 100 milliliter serving. So yes, one serving of ice wine does have 12 grams of sugar, less than an apple, about the same amount as a medium-sized apple. And so let's see if we can kind of go through the math. So a serving of ice wine, on average, a typical ice wine has about 20% residual sugar, about 200 grams per liter. And a serving of ice wine is 2 ounces, about 60 milliliters. So if you take 200 grams per liter, there's 17 60 milliliter servings in a liter of wine. So ice wine with 200 grams per liter divided by 17, quick math, about 12 grams of residual sugar in a 2 ounce 60 milliliter serving of ice wine. It's also concentrated in acidity, flavor, and deliciousness, and is really a great wine style known the world over by professionals and connoisseurs as well as consumers alike. Myth number 2, sugar is added to wine. Wine is a product of grape juice, grape sugar, harvested, crushed, fermented with yeast as a single-celled organism that replicates and consumes all the sugar in the vat of fermenting must. The yeast consumes all the sugar, converts it into alcohol, and that is by definition wine. So fermented grape juice, fresh grape juice, gives you wine as alcohol, as well as carbon dioxide, a natural gas that blows off, and heat. So there may be some unscrupulous winemakers adding a little bit of sugar after fermentation is complete, but this is kind of a hush-hush practice. I'm not very aware of it, but it may be the case that some producers are adding sugar and other agents after. But in theory, that's not a wine at that point. It's a flavored wine beverage. Where they do add sugar is in champagne after the complete fermentation of the first fermentation, and after the second fermentation in champagne, they'll add a little bit of dosage, or a little bit of sugar. Less than 12 grams per liter, 1%, would be brut, and less than 3 grams per liter would be extra brut, or brut nature if no sugar is added. The only other time I know of that you might add sugar is during the fermentation. If the grapes aren't ripe enough and there's not enough natural grape sugar, many winemakers in cool climates like the Loire and many parts of Canada, many parts of northern France, and other parts of the world, New Zealand for example, will add to the fermenting grape juice, granulated sugar that also gets converted into fermentation by the yeast with the grape sugar, and that produces a wine with alcohol and CO2. So a bit of a kind of gray zone. Myth number 3, sweet wine is a poor wine. This is not the case. Many sweet wines are phenomenal wines, whether it's Madeira or port. You could look at Sauterne, as well as Coteau de Léon is a fantastic botrytized wine that we'll look at, that style. And so sweetness is not a bad wine. Sweetness can be a great wine. And in fact, poor wines are not necessarily sweet. So you might have a poor wine that was produced poorly, either crappy grapes or not made well in the winery, or they made a mistake, so they'll have a little residual sugar. And so poor wines can be sweet, and but they don't have to be. Many northeast Italian Merlot from the Piave region are bone dry and not the best. They're mediocre grapes and large yielding and produce acceptable wine, but that is bone dry. So sweet wines aren't all poor, and poor wines aren't all sweet. Now for the good, the bad, and the ugly. First is the ugly, is that sweetness, as mentioned, can and does cover up poor wines. So not all poor wines are sweet, but some poor wines, maybe most, certainly some, many, are covered up with some sweetness. And that can be deceiving, because sweetness is an attractive taste to our palates. We've evolved over tens of thousands of years to hunt for nutrient-rich foods, and sweetness is just a desirable taste that indicates ripeness and high-quality nutrients. So in this case, the sweetness is covering up a poor wine and is a little bit deceitful, and that's the ugly. The bad is a case that somebody who would say or might say, I don't like sweet wines, I only like dry wines. This might be a good argument for why you might only like dry wines, and it is that sweetness, even a little bit of sweetness off dry, like 8 to 15 grams per liter, can cover up, numb some of the delicate flavors of a Riesling grape wine, for example, or Chenin Blanc, or any other wines. Sweetness does cover up the delicate nuances. The good is that sweetness balances high acid. So if you think of a squeeze of lemon and adding a bit of water and a bit of sugar would give you lemonade, and that's generally a nice taste, a nice balance, more so than the lemon water and the sugar water. So sweetness and acidity balance quite nicely. And now the sweet truth. So here are 4 examples of incredible, delicious sweet wines. In top right, we have a 2007 vintage port. These are produced only in the best years, and I'll show you how those are made. Top left is a Sauterne. This is a botrytis-affected grape. Are you familiar with botrytis wines? Bottom left is an ice wine from Taz Winery in Niagara Peninsula, Canada. And bottom right is a sweet red wine called Recioto from Valpolicella, made the same way Amarone is made, by drying the grapes and fermenting it. But in the case of Amarone, it ferments to near dryness. And in the case of Recioto, it's preserved dessert sweet style wine. So these are the winemaking methods for sweet wines. In the top left, we have the recioto, or the raisioning. This is a appassimento, or drying of the grapes and concentration of the wines, as well as the flavor and alcohol and acidity, giving it a balanced dessert taste and style. Bottom left is ice wine, ripens throughout the growing season, and then is harvested in the middle of winter, -8 degrees Celsius, 17 Fahrenheit, legally, often at -10 or more, or less, I should say, and pressed outside in the frozen winter in January, with all the harvesters picking throughout the night at the coldest temperatures, and then goes through long, difficult fermentation, that sweet concentrated nectar, because the frozen water has been pressed off. So that concentrated juice and concentrated nectar goes through into fermentation, and eventually produces a very sweet, but balanced with the acidity, ice wine. On the top right is a botrytis-affected bunch of grapes, and this is a noble rot called Botrytis cinerea. And they infect the grapes and withdraw water from the grapes, but it is a noble rot because once they're raisinated from that withdrawing of water, then they're pressed and fermented, and goes through a very difficult fermentation with the yeast having a hard time with the botrytis grapes. But it ends up fermenting to not near dryness, but sweetness, about 150 to 200 grams per liter for most botrytized dessert wines, and delicious with dried fruit, as well as foie gras and many other foods. Finally, on the bottom right is fortification. This is adding grape brandy. You can see one of the hoses adding clear spirit at 77% alcohol into the grape juice that's coming in. It's partly fermented red grape juice, and once the spirit is combined with the juice, then the fermentation stops. The yeast are halted, and it blends. And this can produce, because it's at a higher alcohol, usually 18, 19, 20, 22% alcohol by volume, these finished port wines, they're stable, shelf stable, and so they'll last 50. In a good vintage port can last 80 or 100 years. If you're born in a declared vintage port year, you'll have a bottle of wine from your vintage for life. And finally, some sweet wines, or what used to be kind of omnibus painted as sweet wines, like German Riesling is coming out of the shadow, with Liebfraumilch and Blue Nun and Black Tower. So this is really coming out of that shadow of the 70s and 80s, and now we understand that great German Rieslings are delicious, food-friendly, dry in most cases, off-dry in some cases, so in that medium dry, medium sweet in some cases, and can be sweet as well. They do ice wine in Germany, as well as botrytis-affected wines. Rosé, same thing, used to be in the 70s, Mateus and White Zinfandel are two rosés that were medium sweet and just not very good. They would have fallen into the poor and sweet category. But now rosés, of course, the pendulum's gone quite the other way, and they're almost all, or many of them are bone dry rosés. And finally, sherry, from left to right are 10 sherry styles. The 5 most on the left are Vinos Generosos, and these are bone dry because of the flora and the yeast sherry aging process. Even more of the sugar is consumed in that aging process for the first two, such as Manzanilla and Fino. Followed by that are Pelo Cortado, Amontillado, and Oloroso. And these are all less than 2 grams per liter. So if you like a very dry wine, this is a very unique, interesting style that's bone dry. The 5 on the right are sweet. We have 3 cream sherries, and then 2 more a Muscatel, as well as a Pedro Jimenez, PX, is known as the grape variety, is a raisin wine, similar to Recioto. So in truth, you may like or not like sweet wines, but some of them are great. And thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed this webinar. Tune in for the next one on Constructive Wine Online. And cheers to you. Thanks very much.